Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. You know what I used to think about ghost stories? Complete horseshit. My name's Caleb Morse, and I've spent the better part of 28 years rolling my eyes at every local legend, every whispered tale about things that go bump in the night. Growing up in Biddeford, just 20 minutes down Route 1 from Kennebunk, I'd heard all the stories about the historic inn. How Silas Perkins, some night watchman from the 1800s, still roams the halls. How guests report cold spots in room 24. How the staff turnover rate makes a McDonald's look stable. All bullshit, I thought. Tourist trap nonsense to sell more rooms and ghost tours. But life has a funny way of forcing you to eat your words. 3 months ago, my construction crew got laid off when the Portland project fell through. The housing market crashed harder than my bank account, and suddenly my options became pretty damn limited. My girlfriend Abby had already moved back to her parents' place in Cape Elizabeth, and I was facing eviction from my apartment on Main Street. That's when my cousin Derek mentioned that Kennebunk Inn was hiring maintenance staff. Decent pay, housing included in the old carriage house behind the main building. Just don't let the ghost stories get to you. He'd laughed over beers at Federal Jack's. Half the staff quits within a month. I figured it was because the work sucked, not because of some dead guy in suspenders. The inn sits on Summer Street like a white elephant, all colonial charm and historical society plaques. Built in 1799, the sign reads, though the current structure dates to the 1920s after a fire. 3 stories of classic New England architecture, complete with black shutters and a wraparound porch, where tourists sip overpriced wine and pretend to spot spirits. I met the manager, Patricia Weber, on a gray October afternoon. She was maybe 60, with steel gray hair pulled back in a bun, and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor you'd expect from someone who'd survived 30 years in hospitality. Her office smelled like old coffee and lemon furniture polish. "You seem level-headed," she said, reviewing my application. "That's important here. Some of our previous employees let their imaginations run wild. I don't believe in ghosts, if that's what you're asking." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Good. Reality is challenging enough without adding fiction to the mix. The carriage house apartment was small but clean. 1 bedroom, kitchenette, and a view of the employee parking lot where my beat-up Subaru would fit right in. Patricia handed me the keys along with a manila envelope. "Your orientation materials," she said. "Read them tonight. Work starts tomorrow at 11 p.m. I didn't open the envelope until I'd unpacked my few belongings and cracked open a shipyard ale. Inside were standard employee policies, tax forms, and a single sheet of paper titled Night Maintenance Guidelines. That's when everything started to change. I spread the Night Maintenance Guidelines across my small kitchen table, using my beer bottle as a paperweight against the October wind, rattling the carriage house windows. The paper felt heavier than it should have, thick stock, like the kind they use for wedding invitations or legal documents. Night Maintenance Guidelines, Kennebunk Inn, confidential, for staff eyes only. Please follow these procedures exactly. Deviations may result in property damage, guest complaints, or personal injury. Rule 1. Begin rounds at 11:15 p.m. sharp. Never start early or late. Use the main staircase only. The service stairs are off limits between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Rule 2. Room 24 must be checked first, but do not enter if the door is ajar. If you hear conversation from inside, wait in the hallway until it stops, then proceed normally. Rule 3. The 3rd floor storage closet, labeled linens, stays locked. If you find it open, close it immediately and continue your rounds. Do not investigate the contents. Rule 4. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., avoid the main lobby. Use the kitchen entrance if you need to access the first floor during this time. Rule 5. If guests report unusual sounds from unoccupied rooms, log the complaint, but do not investigate until after 6 a.m. Rule 6. The basement boiler room check happens at exactly 4:30 a.m. Count the pipes aloud as you inspect them. There should be 7 main lines. If you count differently, leave immediately and return at 5 a.m. I read through the list twice, waiting for the punchline. This had to be some kind of hazing thing for new employees, right? Make the maintenance guy follow a bunch of weird rules, see how long before he cracks or quits. I'd worked construction long enough to know how these games played out. But something about the formal language bothered me. Most practical jokes came with winks and nudges. This read like actual safety protocols, the kind they drill into you at industrial sites where ignoring procedures gets people hurt. I folded the paper and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Whatever game they were playing, I'd humor them for a few weeks until I found something better. My evening routine was simple enough. Leftover pizza reheated in the microwave, a quick shower, and a scroll through job listings on my phone. Nothing promising in Cumberland County. A few gigs in Portland, but the commute from Kennebunk would eat up any extra income. For now, this weird maintenance job was my best option. At 10:45 p.m., I grabbed my keys and walked across the parking lot to the inn's rear entrance. Patricia had given me a master key card along with a flashlight and radio. The night air carried the scent of fallen leaves and something else. Maybe wood smoke from one of the neighboring houses along Summer Street. The inn's back entrance led directly into the kitchen, a cramped galley space that hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. Industrial appliances hummed in the darkness, their pilot lights casting tiny blue stars across stainless steel surfaces. I found the light switch and began my orientation. A clipboard hung beside the time clock with previous shift reports. Nothing too exciting. Replaced bulbs in the second-floor hallway, fixed a leaky faucet in room 18, swept the front porch. Normal stuff. But I noticed something odd about the timestamps. Every entry was logged between 11:15 p.m. and 6 a.m., with no activity recorded during that 2 to 3 a.m. window mentioned in the rules. At exactly 11:15, I started my first round. The main staircase creaked under my weight as I climbed to the second floor. Guest rooms lined both sides of a narrow hallway, their doors marked with brass numbers that looked original to the building. Most rooms were dark, though I could see television light bleeding under a few doors. Normal hotel sounds, muffled conversations, running water, the hum of heating units. Room 24 sat at the end of the hall, its door closed tight. I approached with my master key ready, but paused to listen. Silence. I slipped the key card into the slot and heard the lock disengage with a soft click. The room was empty, as expected. Queen bed with white linens, antique dresser, small bathroom with pedestal sink. Everything looked normal except for the temperature. It felt at least 10 degrees colder than the hallway. I checked the thermostat. Set to 72, same as the other rooms. I completed my inspection quickly and moved on to the third floor. The staircase here was narrower, more cramped. This level housed mostly storage areas and a few economy rooms that the inn rented to budget travelers. The linens closet stood exactly where the rules indicated. A plain wooden door with a brass lock. Secured, as it should be. By midnight, I'd finished checking every accessible area of the building. Nothing out of the ordinary, despite the elaborate rule list. Maybe this job wouldn't be so bad after all. That's when I heard the first sound that made me reconsider everything. The sound came from above. Footsteps in the third-floor hallway where I'd just finished my rounds. I stood at the bottom of the main staircase, listening. Heavy footfalls, like work boots on hardwood. Steady rhythm, moving from one end of the corridor to the other. Then back again. My radio crackled. "Caleb, you there?" Patricia's voice, tinny through the speaker. "Yeah, I'm here. You still in the building?" "No, I left at 10. Why?" "Someone's walking around upstairs, 3rd floor." A pause. "Are you sure?" The footsteps continued overhead, now accompanied by what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor. I pressed the radio button again. "Pretty sure. Want me to check it out?" "No." Her response came fast, sharp. "Log it and continue your rounds. Don't investigate until after 6 a.m. Rule 5. I pulled out the guidelines and reread them by the dim staircase lighting. If guests report unusual sounds from unoccupied rooms, log the complaint, but do not investigate until after 6 a.m. But this wasn't a guest complaint. I was hearing it myself. Still, Patricia's tone suggested I should follow the rules exactly as written. "Copy that," I said into the radio, continuing rounds. The footsteps stopped. I waited another minute, straining to hear anything else. The inn settled into its normal nighttime sounds, heating pipes ticking, wind against windows, the distant hum of the ice machine on the 2nd floor. Whatever had been moving around up there was gone. I spent the next hour checking 1st floor areas: guest registration desk, restaurant dining room, small gift shop near the front entrance. Everything looked normal. A few guests had left wine glasses in the sitting area, which I collected and brought to the kitchen. Standard stuff. At 1:30 a.m., I was replacing a burned-out bulb in the 2nd floor hallway when I heard voices from room 24. 2 people talking, maybe 3. The conversation was muffled, but animated. Not the quiet tones you'd expect from guests settling in for the night. More like a business meeting or heated discussion. I checked my clipboard. Room 24 was listed as unoccupied tonight. Rule 2 came back to me. If you hear conversation from inside, wait in the hallway until it stops, then proceed normally. I positioned myself near the room and listened. The voices continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. I waited another 5 minutes, then used my keycard to check the room. Empty. Bed still made. Bathroom unused. But the temperature had dropped even further, cold enough that I could see my breath. Something was wrong with the heating system in this room. That had to be it. Old buildings like this were notorious for quirky HVAC issues. The cold air might create acoustic effects, make normal building sounds seem like voices. I made a note to check the heating ducts during my next round. By 2:15 a.m., I was back on the 1st floor, killing time before the 4:30 boiler room check. According to the rules, I needed to avoid the main lobby during the 2 to 3 a.m. window, which seemed like another arbitrary restriction. But I'd been hired to follow procedures, not question them. I stationed myself in the kitchen, updating my log and monitoring the radio for any guest calls. The coffee maker gurgled as it finished brewing a fresh pot. Patricia had mentioned that early rising guests sometimes wanted coffee around 5 a.m. At 2:47 a.m., I heard the front door chimes. The lobby was maybe 30 feet away, separated from the kitchen by a narrow service corridor. The chimes were the old-fashioned kind, brass bells on springs that rang whenever someone entered or left. But I'd locked that door myself during my initial rounds. No one should be coming or going at this hour. At 6 a.m. sharp, Patricia arrived for the day shift changeover. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well. "How was your first night?" she asked, reviewing my log entries. "Quiet, mostly. Heard some sounds from the 3rd floor around midnight. Voices in room 24 around 1:30, probably just building settling or heating system issues. She nodded, making notes in her own book. The building has its quirks. You'll get used to them. About those rules. The guidelines work, Caleb. Follow them exactly, and you'll be fine. Something in her tone suggested the conversation was over. I handed her the radio and keys, then walked back to the carriage house as dawn light filtered through the maple trees along Summer Street. I'd survived my first night, but as I pulled the curtains closed and tried to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only seen the beginning of whatever was happening at the Kennebunk Inn. By my fifth night, I thought I had the routine figured out. Follow the rules, ignore the weird sounds, collect my paycheck. Simple enough. But that Tuesday shift changed everything. The evening started normally. I'd grabbed dinner at Allison's restaurant on Main Street. Their fish and chips were decent, and the waitress Jenny had grown up in Kennebunk. She mentioned her grandmother used to clean rooms at the inn back in the 60s. Grammy always said that place had a funny feeling to it, Jenny told me as she refilled my coffee. You used to find guests' belongings moved around between cleanings. Suitcases unpacked, clothes folded differently. Management blamed it on other staff, but Grammy knew better. I'd laughed it off, but her words stuck with me as I walked back across the parking lot at 10:45 p.m. My first 3 rounds went smoothly. Room 24 was its usual Arctic temperature, but empty. The third-floor storage closet remained locked. No footsteps overhead, no mysterious voices. Almost disappointing, really. At 1:15 a.m., everything went sideways. I was checking the second-floor hallway when I heard it. A child crying. Soft sobbing coming from room 18, where I'd fixed that leaky faucet on my first night. According to my clipboard, the room was occupied by the Hendersons, a couple from New Hampshire celebrating their anniversary. The crying continued, muffled but persistent. A kid in distress. My construction crew had taught me to respond to sounds like that. Someone might be hurt. I knocked softly on the door. Everything okay in there? The crying stopped immediately. I waited, listening. Through the thin door, I heard an adult male voice. What was that? A woman responded. What was what? Someone was crying. Sounded like a little kid. Honey, there's no kitten here. Must have been the TV. I turned the TV off an hour ago. I knocked again. Mr. Henderson? This is hotel maintenance. Just checking if you need anything. The door opened to reveal a man in his 50s, wearing pajama pants and a Red Sox t-shirt. Behind him, I could see his wife sitting up in bed, looking confused. We're fine, he said, but we've been hearing strange sounds, crying, like a child. You didn't hear anything in the hallway? I had, but admitting it felt like crossing some invisible line. Old buildings make all kinds of noises. Heating pipes, wind through the vents. I can check the adjacent rooms if you'd like. Please. We paid good money for a peaceful getaway. The rooms on either side of 18 were unoccupied. I unlocked them both and found them empty, undisturbed. But in room 16, I noticed something odd. The bathroom faucet was running, not dripping, but actually flowing. I turned it off and made a note to check the water pressure in the morning. When I returned to room 18, Mr. Henderson looked relieved. Find anything? Loose faucet in 16, probably causing some acoustic feedback through the pipes. Should be quiet now. He thanked me and closed the door, but as I walked away, I heard the crying again. Faint, coming from inside room 18, and this time I was certain it wasn't coming from the Hendersons. At 2:30 a.m., I was avoiding the lobby as instructed when my radio crackled with static. Patricia's voice came through, distorted and difficult to understand. Caleb, 3rd floor, Check. Patricia? You're breaking up. Say again? More static than silence. I tried calling back but got no response. She wasn't supposed to be in the building anyway. Her car wasn't in the parking lot when I'd arrived. The radio crackled again. Storage room. Something wrong. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. The storage closet. Had someone found it open again? I climbed to the 3rd floor, flashlight in hand. The hallway was dark except for the weak glow of exit signs. The storage closet door stood wide open. According to the rules, I should close it immediately and continue my rounds. But what if someone was inside? What if a guest had wandered up here and gotten trapped? I called out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" No response. I approached the doorway and shined my light inside. The storage room was bigger than I'd expected, extending back into shadows my flashlight couldn't penetrate. Metal shelving lined both walls, stacked with cardboard boxes and wrapped furniture. But something was wrong with the geometry. The room seemed to stretch back further than the building's footprint should allow. A box fell from a high shelf, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. Then another. No wind, no vibration. They just fell. I backed away and pulled the door shut, hearing the lock engage. My hands were shaking as I continued my rounds. The radio stayed silent for the rest of the night. At 4:30 a.m., I descended to the boiler room for my routine check. The basement felt colder than usual, and the air had that same organic smell I'd noticed in the lobby. I found the main heating distribution system and began counting the pipes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I stopped, stared at the wall, counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 pipes. There were 8 pipes. Rule 6 was explicit. If you count differently, leave immediately and return at 5 a.m. I backed toward the stairs, keeping my eyes on the pipe configuration. Had I miscounted the previous nights? Was I losing my mind? But no. I could clearly see 8 main heating lines where there should have been 7. The 8th pipe was newer, its metal surface free of the rust and corrosion that marked the others. And it was warm to the touch, though it wasn't connected to anything I could see. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time and didn't look back. The rest of my shift crawled by. I stayed on the 1st floor, avoiding the lobby during the restricted hours and jumping at every sound. When 6 a.m. finally arrived, I was waiting by the back door like a man reprieved from execution. Patricia appeared right on schedule, but something was off about her appearance. Her usually neat hair looked disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "How was your night?" she asked, but her tone was different. Urgent. "Strange. Really strange. I need to ask you about the rules." "What happened?" I told her about the crying in room 18, the radio calls, the storage closet, and the extra pipe in the basement. With each detail, her expression grew more troubled. "You followed the rules exactly?" "Yes. I closed the storage room and left the basement when I counted 8 pipes. But, Patricia, something is seriously wrong with this building. Maybe we should call someone." "No." She cut me off. "No outside help. The rules exist for a reason, Caleb. They keep things contained." "Contained? What are you talking about?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at my logbook. "The inn has a history. Things happened here that can't be explained through normal channels. The rules help maintain a balance." "What kind of things?" Silas Perkins wasn't just a night watchman. He was tasked with keeping certain elements under control. When he died, that responsibility fell to others: the management company, the night staff, us, I felt my skepticism crumbling like old mortar. You're talking about ghosts, actual supernatural activity. I'm talking about reality, Caleb. A reality that most people never have to face. But this place, it's different. The rules aren't arbitrary safety measures. They're a containment protocol. The word containment hit me like a splash of cold water. Containing what? Patricia looked at me with something approaching pity. Things that should have moved on but didn't. Things that found ways to anchor themselves to this place. Silas was the first, but he wasn't the last. The first what? The first to die here under unusual circumstances. Others followed. Staff members who broke the rules, guests who wandered into restricted areas. They never left, Caleb. They're still here, and the rules are the only thing keeping them from affecting the living world more than they already do. I thought about the crying child, the extra pipe, the footsteps in empty hallways. How many? We don't know for certain. Records from the early days are incomplete, but the activity has been increasing lately. That's why we needed someone reliable for the night shift. And if I hadn't followed the rules. Patricia's silence was answer enough. I walked back to the carriage house as the sun painted the autumn sky in shades of orange and gold. The normal world was waking up. Cars starting, dogs barking, the distant sound of lawnmowers from neighboring properties. But I felt like I was looking at it all through glass, separated from ordinary life by the knowledge of what lurked in the shadows of the Kennebunk Inn. As I pulled the curtains closed, I caught a glimpse of movement in the inn's third-floor window. A figure stood silhouetted against the glass, watching me. By the time I grabbed my binoculars from the dresser, the window was empty. But I knew someone, or something, had been there. And I was starting to understand that the rules weren't just guidelines. They were my only protection against whatever was growing stronger inside that building. 3 nights later, I met Tommy Arsenault. I've been avoiding the other staff numbers, preferring to keep my head down and follow the rules. But Thursday evening, as I arrived for my shift, I found a guy about my age sitting on the carriage house steps, smoking a cigarette. "You must be the new maintenance guy," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Tommy, I work weekends, cover your nights off." He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent time on fishing boats. Probably half the men in Kennebunk had that same sun-beaten complexion. His accent placed him as local, maybe Biddeford or Saco. "Caleb, you been doing this long?" Tommy took a long drag before answering. 2 years. Longest anyone's lasted since I started. What happened to the others? Some quit. Some. He flicked his cigarette into the parking lot. Some stopped following the rules. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. What do you mean? Patricia tell you about the containment thing? I nodded. Good. Saves me the speech. Look, Caleb, that building isn't just haunted. It's infected, like a wound that won't heal. The rules keep things stable, but lately... He shook his head. Things are changing. How? The entities are getting smarter. Learning. My last few shifts, I've noticed them testing the boundaries more. Small stuff at first. Doors opening just slightly. Sounds that come right up to the edge of what the rules allow. But last weekend, something tried to talk to me. Talk to you? Room 24. I was doing my regular check when I heard my name called from inside. Clear as day. Tommy, can you help me? Sounded like my ex-girlfriend Sarah. Did you go in? Hell no. Rule 2 says wait for conversation to stop, then proceed normally. But Sarah's been dead for 3 years, Caleb. car accident on the turnpike. Whatever was in that room knew exactly what voice would make me want to break protocol. We sat in silence for a moment. The October air carried the smell of wood smoke from the nearby neighborhoods, mixing with the salt tang from the Kennebunk River. Normal smells from a normal evening in a normal town. But I was starting to understand that nothing about my situation was normal. "Any advice?" I asked. "Don't get curious. Don't try to help. And whatever you do, don't let them know you can hear them clearly." That last part stuck with me as I started my shift at 11:15. Don't let them know you can hear them clearly. What did that mean? I got my answer during the second floor check. Room 24 was occupied tonight. The Martineau family from Quebec, according to my clipboard. As I approached their door, I heard the usual sounds of a family settling in for the night. Children's voices, parents discussing tomorrow's plans, the murmur of a television. But underneath those normal sounds, I heard something else. A man's voice, speaking in a low, urgent tone. The words were unclear, but the rhythm was conversational, like someone on a phone call. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to distinguish between the family's conversation and this other voice. That's when I realized they weren't overlapping. The family would talk, then go quiet. During those quiet moments, the other voice would speak, like something was waiting for gaps in their conversation. I knocked softly. "Hotel maintenance. Everything okay in there?" The door opened to reveal a man in his 40s with tired eyes. "We're fine, but..." "This might sound crazy, but we keep hearing someone talking in here, like there's another person in the room." Behind him, I could see his wife sitting on the bed with 2 young children. They all looked uneasy. "We searched everywhere," the man continued. "Bathroom, closet, even under the beds, but the voice keeps coming back." "What kind of voice?" "Male, older. He seems to be, I don't know, giving instructions, like he's telling someone what to do." My blood went cold. I thought about Tommy's warning about the entities getting smarter, testing boundaries. "I can check the adjacent rooms," I offered. "Sometimes sound carries through the walls in older buildings." But as I unlocked room 22, I knew I wouldn't find a normal explanation. The voice was coming from inside room 24, from something the Martineau family couldn't see. Something that was using their presence as cover for its own activities. Room 22 was empty and silent. I went through the motions of checking the bathroom and closet, but my mind was racing. The rules said to wait for conversation to stop, then proceed normally. But what if the conversation never stopped? What if the entity was deliberately maintaining a constant stream of sound to prevent me from entering? When I returned to room 24, Mr. Martineau looked more agitated. "It's getting worse," he said. "Now it sounds like he's talking directly to us, giving us directions." "What kind of directions?" "He keeps saying, 'Come to the window, look outside.' But it's the middle of the night, and we're 3 stories up. My wife is scared, and the kids won't stop asking who the man is." I had a decision to make. The rules were clear about not entering during conversation, but a family was being terrorized. Tommy had warned me not to get curious, not to try to help. But these were real people with real children, and something was actively threatening them. "Pack your things," I said. "I'm moving you to a different room." "Is that necessary?" "Trust me." 20 minutes later, I had the Martineau family settled in room 14 on the 2nd floor. They seemed relieved to be away from whatever had been tormenting them. I logged the room change and marked room 24 as maintenance required. Then, I returned to deal with whatever was inside. The hallway was quiet as I approached room 24. No voices, no conversation. According to Rule 2, I could now proceed normally. I slid my key card and entered. The room was ice cold, cold enough that frost was forming on the bathroom mirror. But that wasn't what made me stop in my tracks. Someone had written in the condensation on the window, "You shouldn't have moved them." The letters were fresh, still dripping, written from inside the room. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The deadbolt engaged with a solid click that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. That's when I heard the voice Mr. Martineau had described. Male, older, coming from somewhere near the window. "You're new," it said. The others knew better than to interfere. I fumbled for my radio, but got only static. "The rules exist for everyone's protection, boy, including yours." "Silas?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. A pause. "So Patricia told you about me. Good. Saves us some time." "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. To do my job. But you people keep making it harder." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. I could see my breath now, puffing out in small clouds. Those people in here tonight, they were starting to see me clearly. Another few hours, and they would have been able to interact with me directly. Do you understand what that means? I didn't, but I was starting to get an idea. It means the barrier between the living and the dead gets thinner. It means other things start to notice. Things much worse than me. The writing on the window changed, letters rearranging themselves. The rules protect everyone. "I'm trying to follow them," I said. "No, you're trying to be a hero. That's how we lost the last 3 maintenance workers." The door unlocked with another click. "Learn from their mistakes, boy. Your job is to maintain the building, not save the guests. Some things are more important than individual comfort." When I stepped into the hallway, the door closed behind me with finality. I didn't look back. The rest of my shift passed without major incident, though I found myself checking over my shoulder more often than usual. By 6 a.m., I was exhausted and confused, my certainty about right and wrong thoroughly shaken. Patricia took one look at my logbook and frowned. "You moved the Martineau family." They were being terrorized. They were being tested. Now the entity knows it can manipulate you through sympathy. So I should have left them there? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "The rules aren't just about following orders, Caleb. They're about understanding that sometimes protecting the many means sacrificing the comfort of the few." As I walked back to the carriage house, I realized I was no longer just a maintenance worker following strange guidelines. I was part of something much larger and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The first sign that I'd screwed up came 2 nights later when I found Patricia waiting in the kitchen at 11 p.m. "We need to talk," she said, her face pale in the overhead lighting, "before you start your shift." She led me to a small office behind the reception desk that I'd never seen before. File cabinets lined the walls, stuffed with papers that looked decades old. She pulled out a thick folder labeled "Incident Reports, Confidential," and spread several documents across the desk. "These are the files on your predecessors," she said. "I should have shown you earlier, but I hoped you'd be different." The first document was a police report from August 2019. Jacob Levesque, age 24, employed as night maintenance at the Kennebunk Inn, found dead in the basement boiler room. Cause of death: hypothermia. The report noted that the ambient temperature in the building that night was 78 degrees. Jacob tried to help a guest who claimed something was following him through the hallways. Patricia explained. He broke protocol, went looking for what was stalking the man. We found him 3 days later, frozen solid next to the heating pipes. The second file belonged to Maria Santos, 31, who'd worked nights in 2020. Her incident report was stranger. found alive but catatonic in the third-floor storage closet, which had somehow expanded to 3 times its normal size. She'd been missing for 6 days. When they finally got her out, she never spoke again. The report included a note from her family that she'd been trying to help the voices by bringing them objects they requested. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Pineland Farms, the psychiatric facility. She sits by her window and draws the same room over and over. A storage space filled with boxes that seem to go on forever." The third file made my hands shake. David Cormier, 28, hired in January 2022. Found hanging in room 24, though the medical examiner couldn't determine how the noose had been secured. There were no attachment points on the ceiling, and the rope showed no signs of having supported weight. David moved an elderly guest who complained about children playing in the walls, Patricia continued. The next night, he heard children calling his name from inside the walls themselves. He started tearing apart the drywall, trying to reach them. I set the files down, my stomach churning, and you think I'm going down the same path. Moving the Martineau family created a breach in the containment system. You showed the entities that our rules can be circumvented through emotional manipulation. That's exactly how it started with the others. But they were being terrorized. They were being tested. The entities need to understand the boundaries, and we need to enforce them consistently. When you moved them, you taught every spirit in this building that the night staff can be swayed by sympathy. She pulled out a blueprint of the inn, marked with red ink in various locations. Since Thursday night, we've had 7 more incidents. Room 16's faucet won't stop running no matter what we do. The third-floor storage closet has been found open every morning this week. And yesterday, housekeeping found writing on the walls in 4 different guest rooms. What kind of writing? Names. The names of everyone who's ever died in this building, including Jacob, Maria, and David. My mouth went dry. How many names? 37, going back to 1823. But here's what really concerns me. There are 3 new names on the list. Names that shouldn't be there yet. She handed me a photograph taken in room 12. Written in what looked like condensation on the bathroom mirror were 3 names. Talmy Arsenal, Patricia Weber, Caleb Morse. "We're on their list now," she said quietly. "Your breach let something else in, something that's been watching us." That night's shift felt different from the moment I entered the building. The air seemed thicker, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. Even the normal sounds, heating pipes, settling wood, distant traffic on Summer Street, seemed muffled, as if the building itself was holding its breath. My first round went smoothly, until I reached the 3rd floor. The storage closet door stood wide open, and this time I could see deep into the space. The room extended back much further than should have been possible, disappearing into darkness that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. Boxes and furniture sat on shelves that stretched up beyond the reach of my beam. But that wasn't what made me freeze. Something was moving around in there. Multiple somethings, shuffling through the stored items like they were shopping. I heard cardboard rustling, objects being moved, and what sounded like whispered conversations. Rule 3. Close it immediately and continue my rounds. I grabbed the door handle and pulled it shut, but it resisted, as if someone was holding it from the other side. I put my full weight behind it and heard the lock engage, but not before glimpsing a pale hand reaching toward me from the shadows. The rest of the 3rd floor felt wrong. Every door seemed slightly ajar. Every shadow seemed to contain movement just at the edge of my vision. I hurried through my checklist and headed downstairs. Room 24 was occupied again. A businessman from Portland, according to my log. But as I approached, I heard multiple voices inside. Not just conversation, but what sounded like a meeting. At least 6 different people talking over each other. Their words indistinct, but their tone urgent. Rule 2 said to wait for conversation to stop, but it didn't stop. It went on for 20 minutes, growing louder and more agitated. Finally, I knocked. "Everything all right in there?" The businessman answered immediately. "Thank God, someone normal. Can you come in? I think there's been some kind of mistake with my reservation." The voices inside went silent. "What kind of mistake?" "There are people in here, in my room. They won't leave, and they keep talking about someone named Caleb. They seem very interested in meeting him." My blood turned to ice water. I backed away from the door. "Sir, I'm going to call the front desk and see about moving you to a different room." "No, don't leave me alone with them, please." But I was already walking away, my radio crackling with static. Every time I tried to call Patricia, the transmission dissolved into white noise, punctuated by what sounded like laughter. At 2:30 a.m. during the lobby restriction period, I heard the front door chimes. But this time I could see into the lobby from the kitchen entrance. A steady stream of translucent figures was walking through the locked front door, men and women in period clothing, children in old-fashioned dress, all moving with purpose toward the main staircase. I counted at least 20 before I lost track. They climbed the stairs in single file, their footsteps making no sound on the hardwood floors. Each one turned to look at me as they passed, their faces pale and expressionless. The last figure in line was familiar. Tommy Arsenault, looking exactly as he had when I'd met him 3 nights ago, except for his eyes. They were completely black, like holes burned through his face. He raised one hand in a small wave before following the others upstairs. My radio crackled. "Caleb?" Tommy's voice, but distorted, coming from everywhere at once. "Where are you, buddy?" "We're all waiting for you up here." I turned off the radio and crouched behind the prep counter, trying to control my breathing. Through the service corridor, I could hear doors opening and closing throughout the building. Footsteps in the hallways, voices calling my name from different floors. "Caleb, come help us," from the 2nd floor. "We need to show you something," from the 3rd. "Don't you want to meet your new friends?" from the basement. At 4:30 a.m., I forced myself to make the boiler room check. The basement stairs creaked under my weight, each step taking me further from any possible escape route. The mechanical room was blazing hot, despite the October chill outside. The heating pipes had multiplied. Where there should have been 7 main lines, I now counted 15. They branched and twisted across the ceiling like blood vessels, some disappearing into walls that couldn't possibly contain them. The new pipes glowed cherry red, radiating heat that made the air shimmer. And standing next to the boiler was Jacob Levesque. I recognized him from his employee photo in Patricia's files. Young guy with a kind face and calloused hands from construction work. Except now his skin was blue-white with frostbite, and ice crystals had formed in his hair and eyebrows. "You're making the same mistake I did," he said, his breath visible in clouds despite the overwhelming heat. "Trying to help when you should have just followed the rules." "Jacob? Patricia's upstairs, you know. She came in early tonight, said she was worried about you." He smiled, and I could see that his teeth were cracked from the cold. "Want to know where we put her?" I backed toward the stairs, but another figure blocked my path. Maria Santos, her nurse's scrubs torn and dirty, her eyes wide with the same madness I'd seen in the psychiatric report photos. "She's in the storage room," Maria said. "We made it extra big for her. She can draw all the pictures she wants now." I pushed past her and ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Behind me, I heard Jacob's frozen laughter and Maria's incoherent whispers about boxes that never ended. The building was fully alive now. Every room pulsed with activity, every hallway filled with figures that shouldn't exist. As I reached the first floor, I saw the real Tommy Arsenault standing by the front desk, looking exactly as confused and terrified as I felt. "Caleb, thank Christ. Something's wrong here. I got a call from Patricia saying there was an emergency, but when I arrived..." He gestured helplessly at the chaos around us. "What the hell is happening?" Before I could answer, another Tommy stepped out of the elevator. Then another came down the main staircase. Soon there were 6 different versions of Tommy Arsenault surrounding us, each one slightly different. One with black eyes, one with frostbitten skin, one whose clothes were soaked with water that smelled like the Kennebunk River. The real Tommy grabbed my arm. Which rules do we follow now? That's when I realized the truth. The entities hadn't just learned to manipulate our emotions. They'd learned to replace us entirely. And somewhere in this building, Patricia was trapped with whatever I'd unleashed when I decided to be a hero. "How do I know you're real?" I asked Tommy, backing toward the kitchen entrance. The 6 duplicate Tommies stood motionless around the lobby, watching us with varying expressions of hunger, amusement, and something that might have been pity. The real Tommy, or what I hoped was the real Tommy, looked as terrified as I felt. "Ask me something only I would know," he said quickly. "Tell me about Sarah." His face crumpled. "Car accident on the turnpike 3 years ago. Black ice near the Biddeford exit. She was coming back from visiting her sister in Wells when..." He stopped, looking around at his duplicates, but they might know that too now. One of the fake Tommies smiled. "She screamed your name when the car started spinning." The real Tommy flinched like he'd been struck. "Don't listen to them." "She thought about the ring you never gave her while the paramedics tried to stop the bleeding," said another duplicate. "Stop!" Tommy's voice cracked. I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the kitchen. Behind us, the fake Tommies began to laugh in perfect unison, a sound like breaking glass that followed us down the service corridor. In the kitchen, I found Patricia's emergency key ring hanging beside the industrial refrigerator. Master keys for every lock in the building, including maintenance areas that weren't on my normal route. "We need to get to the 3rd floor," I told Tommy. "Patricia's trapped in the storage room." "How do you know?" "One of my predecessors told me. Guy named Jacob who froze to death down there." I pointed toward the basement. "He's walking around now, offering helpful advice." Tommy stared at me. "Jesus, Caleb. What did you do?" I told him about moving the Martineau family, about breaking the containment protocol. With each detail, his expression grew darker. "You realize we might all be dead because you wanted to play hero." "I was trying to help. Yeah, that's what Patricia said the others thought too." We climbed the back stairs to avoid the main lobby, but the building itself seemed to be working against us. Halfway to the 2nd floor, the staircase developed extra steps. 14 risers where there should have been 12. The hallway at the top stretched longer than the building's footprint, lined with doors that bore room numbers I'd never seen before. Room 25, Room 26, Room 27. "The inn only goes up to Room 24, Tommy said. I tried the handle of Room 25. Locked, but I could hear voices inside, multiple conversations overlapping, like a crowded restaurant. Through the keyhole, I glimpsed a space filled with dining tables where translucent figures sat eating meals that cast no shadows. "Don't look," Tommy warned, but it was too late. One of the diners had noticed me. An elderly woman in a high-neck dress from the 1890s. She stood from her table and walked toward the door, her mouth opening wider than any human jaw should allow. "We've been saving you a seat," she said, her voice muffled by the wood but perfectly clear. "The dinner service never ends here, I backed away from the door as something heavy struck it from the inside. Then another impact. And another. "They're coming through," Tommy said. We ran for the 3rd floor, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Behind us, I heard the sound of splintering wood as room 25's door gave way. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. Too many footsteps for the number of diners I'd seen. The 3rd floor was a maze. Corridors branched off in directions that shouldn't exist, leading to areas I'd never seen before. Emergency exit signs pointed toward walls. Some hallways sloped upward at impossible angles, while others seemed to curve back on themselves. "There," Tommy pointed to a familiar door marked linens. The storage closet stood open, revealing a space that had expanded far beyond the building's exterior walls. Shelving in it stretched back into darkness, their contents hidden under white sheets that rustled without any breeze. The air inside smelled like old paper, and something sweet sick, like flowers left too long in water. "Patricia," I called into the darkness. Her voice came back faint and distant. "Don't come in here. It's not safe." "Where are you?" "I don't know. It keeps changing. The rows move when I'm not looking." I grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit and stepped into the storage space. Tommy caught my arm. "This is exactly how they get the others. You go in there. You might never come out." "I can't leave her." "Then we go together, but we stay connected." He pulled a length of rope from a maintenance cart. "Tie this around your waist." The storage room felt like walking through a library designed by someone who'd only heard books described secondhand. The shelving units rose higher than my light could reach, filled with objects that shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. Boxes became furniture. Furniture became clothing. Clothing became things I couldn't identify. "Patricia, keep talking. Follow my voice." I'm trying, but the sound keeps moving. It's like the space is rotating around me. We moved deeper into the maze, following the rope back to the entrance. But after 10 minutes of searching, I realized the entrance was no longer behind us. The rope led to a brick wall where the door should have been. "We're trapped," Tommy said. That's when I heard children laughing. 3 young voices, maybe 8 or 9 years old, coming from somewhere to our left. They were playing a game, chanting a rhyme I almost recognized. "Round and round the building goes. Where it stops, nobody knows. If you break the keeper's rules, you become the keeper's tools." "Those aren't regular kids," Tommy whispered. "No, but they might know where Patricia is." We followed the voices through a section where the shelves held only mirrors, dozens of them, reflecting our flashlight beam in a web of light that made the space feel infinite. In one mirror, I caught a glimpse of something that made me stop. Patricia sat at a small desk, writing frantically in a ledger book. She looked exhausted, her hair disheveled and her clothes wrinkled. Around her, the same 3 children danced in a circle, their faces pale and their clothes from another era. "She's through here," I told Tommy, approaching the mirror. But when I reached out to touch the glass, my hand passed through it like water. The mirror was a window, or a door. "That's not possible," Tommy started to say, but I was already stepping through. The space on the other side felt different, smaller, more confined, like the storage room's original dimensions. Patricia looked up as we appeared, relief flooding her face. "Thank God. I've been trapped here for hours. These children, they keep asking me to write names in this book." The 3 children stood motionless now, watching us with eyes that held too much knowledge for their young faces. 2 girls and a boy, all dressed in clothing from the early 1900s. "What names?" I asked. Patricia held up the ledger. Page after page was filled with handwritten entries, names, dates, and brief descriptions. Everyone who's ever died in the inn. They want me to complete the record. I read over her shoulder. The entries went back to 1823. Ezra Whitman, consumption, room 7. Mary Caldwell, childbirth complications, room 12. Thomas Reed, fell downstairs, main lobby. The entries continued chronologically through 2 centuries of death, guests who succumbed to illness, accidents, even a few suicides. But the final entries made my stomach drop. Jacob Levesque, 2019, hypothermia, basement. Maria Santos, 2020, psychological break, storage room. David Cormier, 2022, hanging, room 24. Below those, 3 new entries waited to be completed. Patricia Weber, 2024, -- Thomas Arsenault, 2024, -- Caleb Morse, 2024, -- They want me to fill in how we die, Patricia said quietly. And when? One of the children, a girl with blonde curls, spoke in a voice like dried leaves. The man with the watch says you have to choose. You can follow the old rules and die slowly, or break them all and die quickly. What man with the watch? The night keeper. He's been waiting for you. The boy stepped forward, his face serious beyond his apparent years. He made us write our own names first. That's how we learned to help him keep the records. You're the children who died here? The second girl nodded. Diphtheria, 1903. All 3 of us in the same week. Mama brought us here because she thought the country air would help. I looked at Tommy, who was staring at the ledger with growing horror. We need to get out of here. But when I turned back toward the mirror we'd entered through, it showed only our reflection. The storage room beyond was gone, replaced by what looked like the inn's original basement. Stone walls, wooden beams, and the smell of earth and mold. The space keeps changing, Patricia explained. It's not really a room anymore. It's more like a filing system. Everything that's ever happened in the inn exists here simultaneously. Through the mirror, I could see other scenes playing out. Guests from different eras sleeping in beds that occupied the same space across decades. Staff members from the 1800s carrying out tasks alongside modern housekeeping. Multiple versions of the same rooms layered on top of each other like double-exposed photographs. The man with the watch controls all of it, the blonde girl said. He's been collecting moments since he died. Now he has enough to change the rules. Where is he? The children pointed toward a narrow doorway I hadn't noticed before. Through it, I could see a set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. He's waiting in the first room, the boy said. The room where it all started. Silas Perkins's room, Patricia whispered. The one where he died. I looked at the unfinished entries in the ledger, at the dates waiting to be filled in. Tonight's date. If we go down there, we're walking into his trap. If we don't, Tommy said, we'll never leave this storage room, and eventually, those blanks get filled in anyway. One of the children smiled, revealing teeth too sharp for a human child. Either way, you get to meet him. That's what he's been planning since the night you moved those nice people from room 24. I realized then that everything, the escalating activity, the rule violations, even my good intentions, had been orchestrated by something that had been dead for over a century, but had learned to use the inn's accumulated supernatural energy like a puppeteer pulling strings. And now he was ready to meet us face to face. The wooden stairs descended much further than the inn's foundation should have allowed. Each step took us deeper into darkness that our flashlights couldn't fully penetrate, the air growing thicker with the smell of old wood and something metallic that reminded me of blood. This doesn't make sense, Tommy muttered, counting steps. We should have hit bedrock by now. Patricia walked between us, still clutching the death ledger. The building has roots, she said quietly. Silas has had over a century to dig them deep. After what felt like 50 steps, we reached a doorway made of rough-hewn timber that looked far older than the inn's 1799 construction date. Beyond it lay a small room lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. Silas Perkins sat at a writing desk in the center of the room, his back to us. He wore the same dark suit and vest I'd seen in the historical photographs, but his clothes showed no signs of age or decay. A pocket watch chain gleamed across his waistband. "Please, come in," he said without turning around. "I've been waiting quite some time for this conversation." The room was exactly what you'd expect from a 19th century night watchman's quarters. Simple furniture, a narrow bed with rough blankets, shelves lined with ledger books. But the walls disturbed me. They were covered with what looked like blueprints, but not of any building I recognized. These showed structural plans that extended deep underground, with chambers and corridors branching out like root systems beneath all of Kennebunk. Silas finally turned to face us. He looked exactly as he had in life, a man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and calloused hands. The only thing that marked him as dead was the hole in his forehead, perfectly round, like a bullet wound. "You're wondering about this," he said, touching the wound. "Suicide, officially. But the truth is more complicated." "What do you want from us?" I asked. "From you? Nothing you haven't already given me." He smiled, and it was genuinely warm, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You see, Caleb, the rules you've been following weren't designed to contain anything. They were designed to collect it." He gestured to the blueprints on the walls. "Every violation, every moment of supernatural activity, every death, it all feeds into the foundation I've been building. Think of it as a battery, storing energy that can be used to affect the living world. You've been manipulating us. I've been guiding you. There's a difference." He stood and walked to one of the blueprints. "When I was alive, I discovered that this location sits on what you might call a thin spot, a place where the boundary between life and death is more permeable than usual. The original inn was built here deliberately, by people who understood what they were working with." Patricia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "The Historical Society records never mentioned that. Because the Historical Society was never meant to know. The real history of this place was kept by a select few families, the Webbers among them." Patricia went pale. "My family?" "Your great-great-grandfather Edmund was one of the original caretakers. Your family has been maintaining the collection system for 4 generations, though the knowledge was diluted over time. By the time you inherited the responsibility, you understood only pieces of the truth." Tommy was studying the blueprints with the practiced eye of someone who'd worked construction. "These tunnels, they're under the whole town. Much of it, yes. The network extends beneath the business district, several residential areas, even under the Kennebunk River itself. Every significant building in town has at least one access point." "Access to what?" Silas pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. "To the largest collection of human spiritual energy ever assembled. 197 years of accumulated death, fear, hope, love, and loss. All of it concentrated and refined until it became something new." He snapped the watch closed. "Something I can direct." That's when I understood. You're not trapped here. You're in control. I chose to remain, yes. Death was simply a career change. He moved to another blueprint, this one showing the inn in cross-section. But controlling supernatural energy requires careful planning. The rules aren't arbitrary. They're a harvesting protocol. Every time someone follows them out of fear, every time they break them out of compassion, every emotional response feeds the system. The other workers who died were necessary components. Jacob's hypothermia generated weeks of thermal energy fluctuations. Maria's madness created fascinating psychological resonances. David's despair was particularly potent. He looked at me with something like pride. But you, Caleb, have been exceptional. Your guilt over the Martineau family has been powering most of the building for 3 days. Patricia opened the death ledger and showed him the unfinished entries. You want us to complete these. I want you to choose how they get completed. You see, tonight marks the culmination of my project. I have enough stored energy to permanently tear open the barrier between worlds, but I need willing participants to anchor the process. He walked to a section of wall covered with clockwork mechanisms I hadn't noticed before. Gears and springs and pendulums that ticked in complex rhythms. Once the barrier falls, every spirit that has ever been contained here will be free to affect the living world directly. No more hiding, no more rules, no more pretending that death is an ending. That's insane, Tommy said. That's evolution. Humanity has lived in ignorance of the spiritual realm for too long. Tonight, we force them to acknowledge reality. The clockwork mechanisms began to chime, like a cacophony of different tones that seemed to resonate through the stone floor. Above us, I could hear the building responding. Doors slamming, glass breaking, voices calling out in languages I didn't recognize. The process has already begun, Silas said, but it needs 3 anchors, 3 living souls who choose to stay and complete the connection. You can fight it and die slowly, allowing your fear and pain to power the final phase. Or you can accept your role willingly, and I'll make the transition painless. What about the guests? The people upstairs? They'll serve as witnesses. Some will survive to tell the world what happened here. Others will join us. Their choice, ultimately. Patricia was writing in the ledger, her hand shaking. I saw her fill in the date next to her name, then the cause of death. Willing sacrifice. Patricia, don't. Someone has to stop this, she said. If all 3 of us refuse, he'll just find another way. At least this way, we have some control. Tommy grabbed the pen from her hand. There has to be another option. That's when I noticed something Silas had overlooked. The clockwork mechanisms on the wall weren't just powering his ritual. They were also connected to the building's structural systems. Pipes, electrical conduits, and what looked like gas lines all fed into the mechanical array. The building itself is the anchor, I realized. You're not just tearing down spiritual barriers, you're turning the entire inn into a gateway. Silas smiled wider. Very good. Yes, the building will become a permanent portal between worlds. The first of many, if my calculations are correct. I thought about the blueprints showing tunnels under the whole town. If he succeeded here, the gateway could expand through the underground network, eventually covering all of Kennebunk, then beyond. What happens if we destroy the clockwork? Then the accumulated energy releases all at once, probably taking half the town with it. The explosion would be supernatural, not nuclear, but the effect would be similar. Patricia was still writing in the ledger. There is another way, she said quietly. The rules weren't just for harvesting energy. They were also a control system, if someone with proper authority rewrote them. The Weber family authority, Silas said, his smile fading. Yes, that could theoretically interrupt the process. but it would require intimate knowledge of the original protocols and the willingness to bind oneself permanently to the building as its new keeper. Like you did, like I did, though I had the advantage of already being dead. Patricia closed the ledger. My great-great-grandfather left journals, hidden in the family home. I've read them. The clockwork mechanisms were chiming faster now, their rhythms building towards some kind of crescendo. Upstairs, the sounds of chaos were growing louder, screaming, running footsteps, what sounded like furniture being thrown around. "Choose quickly," Silas said. "The process becomes irreversible at sunrise." I looked at Tommy, who was studying the blueprints with desperate intensity. Patricia was already moving toward the clockwork array, pulling a small key from her pocket, one I'd never seen before. "Patricia, if you do this, you'll be trapped here forever. Better than letting him turn the whole world into this place." She inserted the key into a mechanism I hadn't noticed, a small panel marked with symbols that definitely weren't English. The clockwork began to slow its frantic pace. Silas moved toward her, his calm demeanor finally cracking. "You don't understand the consequences. The energy has to go somewhere. If you redirect it, I'll contain it, the way my family was supposed to do from the beginning." The room filled with blinding light as Patricia turned the key. 3 months later, I'm working construction again. Good, honest work, rebuilding a barn in Arundel, where the only spirits I encounter come in bottles after quitting time. My crew thinks the scar on my forehead came from a falling beam, and I let them believe it. The truth is more complicated. When Patricia turned that key, the released energy had to go somewhere. Most of it flowed back into the earth through the tunnel network Silas had spent 2 centuries building. But some of it, the part that had been building toward the gateway opening, needed a living conduit to safely dissipate. I volunteered. Tommy was too smart to argue. The process felt like being struck by lightning made of memory. For 3 days, I experienced every death that had ever occurred in the inn. Not just the moment of dying, but the entire emotional spectrum surrounding each person's final hours. Fear, peace, regret, acceptance, love, despair. All of it passed through me and into the ground beneath Kennebunk. When I finally woke up in Central Maine Medical Center, the doctors said I'd been found unconscious in the inn's parking lot by morning joggers. Severe exhaustion, they decided. Probably overwork and poor nutrition. They never found Patricia. The inn reopened 6 weeks later under new management. A company from Boston bought it through a complicated trust arrangement that Tommy helped me research. All the paperwork traces back to law firms that have been handling Weber family affairs since the 1800s. The new night maintenance worker is a local guy named Bill Hutchins. I know because I drive by sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. The building looks normal now, just another historic inn catering to tourists and weekend getaways. The only sign that anything changed is a small plaque by the front door, dedicating the building to Patricia Weber, friend and protector. Bill follows a much simpler set of rules. Basic security procedures, nothing supernatural. He checks doors, monitors the heating system, logs complaints from guests about creaky floorboards and thin walls. Normal hotel problems in a normal building. But sometimes, when I'm driving past on my way home from Bentley Saloon, I see a figure in the 3rd floor window. A woman with steel gray hair, watching the street below. She never waves, never acknowledges my presence. Just watches, like she's keeping guard over something. Tommy left town 2 weeks after that night. Got a job with a fishing operation out of Bar Harbor, working boats instead of buildings. Smart choice. Before he left, he told me something I think about often. Patricia knew what would happen when she turned that key, he said. She didn't just stop Silas, she took his place. I've never been able to confirm that theory, but I suspect he's right. The inn needs a keeper, someone to maintain the balance between worlds. Patricia understood that better than any of us. Sometimes I get calls from other historical properties around New England. Old hotels with strange reputations, bed and breakfasts where staff turnover is unusually high. They offer good money for someone with experience handling unusual maintenance situations. I always turn them down, but I keep the rules Patricia gave me that first night, folded in my wallet behind my driver's license. 6 simple guidelines that taught me the difference between following orders and understanding responsibility, between being a hero and being useful. And late at night, when I can't sleep and find myself driving past the inn, I sometimes see new writing in the condensation on that third-floor window. Usually just 2 words. Thank you. I never stop to read more. Some conversations are better left unfinished.